Thank you. Here comes another of the minority of gray-haired men in 50 plus to talk. I'm Henrik from World Council of Churches. It's still in Switzerland, but I'm a Swede, but nobody really knows the difference between the countries, except when we're playing football against each other. So I don't like to remind you about football today. Sweden plays tomorrow. I think we are living in a new era when we are in great need of change. Our planetary boundaries gives us a clear message that we as humanity need to change. Our ethical and moral sense says that we have to change when we are in the great injustice when it comes to access of the fruit of the creation. The global transformation we stand in front of must be driven by our hopes and our beliefs and our convictions that a different world is possible. Values and visions are important to the real change, and the challenge of climate change is a challenge of deep transformation. A sustainable future is a vision that must be fed and nurtured by values. I see very important contributions from faith communities all over the world to the agenda to reach in the SDG and to transform the societies to low-carbon societies. World Council of Churches includes 355 different churches and faith communities from Protestant, Orthodox, Reformed, Anglican, Evangelical and other traditions with more than 500 million members. Some member churches of WCC itself have divested from fossil fuel industries. It should be a clear logic that if you're acting on climate change, as many of these churches are, and to advocate for higher ambitions in cutting emissions, that your investments should not give returns that come from fossil fuels. There is a special accountability or a responsibility for faith-based actors in affluent circumstances to understand their contribution to the carbon emissions in their investments. There is a line so clear that churches and church-based organizations can't stay with investments in funds that are supporting fossil fuels when they at the same time advocate for a low-carbon development. And we know that the emissions of greenhouse gases will affect the poor, the people on the marginals, the indigenous of the world first. Witnesses from those member churches where climate change is affecting the everyday life are more and more common. It may be from the rainforest, it may be from the Arctic, as we heard today. And we must act and not only talk and also celebrate. As Laudato says in our Article 191, efforts to promote a sustainable use of natural resources are not a waste of money, but rather an investment capable of providing other economic benefits in medium term. The stories from member churches like the Church of Sweden that I am ordained in is pointing the same direction. From understanding that climate change is for real and that is an existential and spiritual question, there must be a way to act. Rich churches should use their resources to support sustainable solutions. And those saying that we must act as responsible stewards with our resources so that we can support our congregations in daily life and thereby be hesitant to pull their investment out of fossil fuels. I say I couldn't agree more. Because if I say that the example of Church of Sweden shows that several years of returns from the investment after full divestment is higher than the reference portfolio, some of the more stubborn on keeping the fossil investments become a bit more interested. But I think that should not be the driving force to actually see. I think it must be the moral and ethical obligation that should push us forward on this. From a theological point of view, we are in a need to act in favor of oikos, the Greek word that both ecology and economy stems from. It is to keep the house in order, to share the resources in a fair and equitable way that gains the whole oikos, household and all who lives there. Today, the household is the planet Earth, as we have heard so many times. We have our wisdom, we have our knowledge and values today, and the economy must serve the planet and those who live there, not the other way around. But even more important are the reinvestments. You cannot really change by not just investing in fossils. You must work for investments that support sustainable development. And I skip a lot here. The logic of divestment couldn't be simpler. And I'm sorry to repeat what Bill said yesterday. If it's wrong to wreck the climate, it is wrong to profit from that wreckage. So it's so easy. Faith communities are important voices in a large choir that tells us to move forward. The ethical motives for investments have a long story in our family of churches. Remember the apartheid regime and how churches acted to isolate South Africa and the apartheid regime. We need to make a real change to avoid future that will be hard for coming generations to deal with. We need innovations, we need political decisions. Everybody agreed with that, but we also need visions and long-term aspirations. Faith could play a central part when it comes to a common vision that will help us to bring this transformation. Justice and equity is a part of the spiritual vision that faith communities can bring. And I want to close with a symbolic illustration on what should be in focus for our investments and that should accompany the important decision we take in a time when humanity is being behind the steering wheel of the future of the full planet. It is about 3 empty chairs. In every room of decisions, in synods or wherever, there should be 3 empty chairs that would represent those that doesn't have a voice when the decision comes up. It's the poor of the world today. It's the children and the common future generations. And it's the creation and all species. They don't have the voices. Leave those 3 empty chairs to speak in silence before you take the decisions. I think that people of faith, we need to bring those voices. We need to bring those empty chairs to speak. Thank you.